First story, The Drone Beyond the Shadows. Daniel was a hobbyist filmmaker with a knack for drone photography. His weekends were spent exploring desolate landscapes, capturing eerie shots of abandoned factories, shadowy forests, and other places most people avoided. One fateful day, Daniel's drone picked up a strange signal while he was filming in a barren desert. It was an odd hum, rhythmic yet unnerving, leading him to a vast expanse of restricted land surrounded by barbed wire fences. His curiosity piqued, Daniel launched his drone higher. The camera zoomed in on a large facility, the infamous Area 51. He knew it was risky, but the thought of capturing something extraordinary overwhelmed his better judgment. As the drone flew closer, his screen flickered, and the feed cut out. Frustrated, Daniel retrieved his drone but couldn't stop thinking about what lay beyond those fences. That night, he scoured the internet for blueprints and information about Area 51. Most of it was speculation, but one recurring theory caught his attention: rumors of alien experiments. Daniel's fascination turned into obsession. He began modifying his drone. Over weeks, he crafted an advanced, almost sci-fi piece of machinery. Its body was smaller and faster, its camera sharper, and most importantly, Daniel had incorporated a cloaking mechanism he had read about in obscure online forums. It made the drone nearly invisible to radar and the naked eye. On a moonless night, Daniel set out for the restricted zone again. As his cloaked drone soared over the fences, it streamed a crystal-clear video feed back to his laptop. The facility was immense, with hangars and underground tunnels barely visible under the dim glow of floodlights. Daniel's heart pounded as the drone descended closer. The first thing he saw chilled him: massive chambers filled with alien creatures suspended in liquid-filled tanks. Their elongated heads and lifeless eyes stared at him through the screen. Some of the creatures twitched, their bodies covered in wires and scars, evidence of grotesque experiments. One chamber showed a dissection in progress, scientists in hazmat suits carving into an alien body while its chest pulsed faintly, as though it were still alive. The drone's microphone picked up muffled voices discussing the creation of bioweapons and hybrid organisms. Then, the drone stumbled upon something even darker. A hidden section of the facility housed humanoid figures, mutations. They looked human but had unnaturally large eyes, grayish skin, and elongated limbs. Daniel couldn't tell if they were extraterrestrials or human test subjects, transformed by something sinister. He felt sick. This wasn't just about aliens. It was about humanity's capacity for cruelty and greed. Suddenly, alarms blared. Daniel's screen crackled. "Unidentified signal detected," a computerized voice announced. The drone feed began to cut in and out. Panicking, Daniel activated the cloaking mechanism, and the alarm ceased. But something had changed. The creatures in the tanks began to stir, their movements erratic and violent. Scientists fled, shouting about a containment breach. Daniel maneuvered his drone further, desperate to see more. The screen showed chaos. One of the humanoid mutations broke free from its restraints, moving with inhuman speed. It tore through guards and scientists alike, its shrill scream piercing Daniel's ears. The other creatures began pounding on their tanks, cracking the glass. Just as Daniel thought he had seen enough, the drone feed froze on a chilling sight, one of the humanoid creatures staring directly at the camera, as though it could see through the cloaking mechanism. A distorted voice came through his speakers. "You shouldn't have come." Terrified, Daniel tried to recall the drone, but it wouldn't respond. The feed went black, and an otherworldly hum filled his room. His laptop screen flickered, displaying binary code that rearranged into a single word: "Run." The hum grew louder. Lights in Daniel's house flickered, and his electronics malfunctioned. He bolted to the door, but before he could leave, his drone, damaged and sparking, crashed through his window. Its camera lens pointed at him, and the same distorted voice whispered, "They're coming." From the corner of his eye, Daniel saw shadows moving unnaturally, The room grew cold, and an oppressive silence followed. He ran outside, only to find his street eerily empty. The world felt wrong, like a distorted version of reality. For days, Daniel tried to return to normal life, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His reflection in mirrors sometimes lingered longer than it should. At night, he heard faint whispers and saw flickers of movement in the corners of his vision. One night, as he sat reviewing the fragmented footage from his drone, a knock echoed through his house. It was soft at first, then louder, more insistent. When he opened the door, no one was there, only the distant hum he first heard in the desert. A voice whispered behind him, "You know too much." Daniel was never seen again. His home was found abandoned, the walls covered in cryptic symbols and binary code. His drone was discovered smashed to pieces, its memory wiped clean. But some say, on moonless nights, you can still hear the faint hum near Area 51, as if Daniel's drone is still out there, searching, uncovering secrets better left buried. And if you listen closely, you might hear a distorted voice warning you to turn back before it's too late. Second story, the Phantom Frequency. Elliot was a seasoned night shift DJ at WXMT, a small, aging radio station perched high in the mountains. He loved the solitude of the late hours and the eerie charm of the station. The equipment was old, and the building creaked with every gust of wind, but Elliot found comfort in the familiar rhythms of his work. One particularly cold and quiet night, as snow blanketed the mountain, Elliot sipped his coffee and queued up a set of jazz classics. The signal hummed smoothly, and the night seemed uneventful until a call came through on the studio line. "WXMT, this is Elliot. Who's calling?" he answered. At first, there was only static. Then, a faint voice crackled through the line, soft and strained, like someone speaking from far away. "Play Blue Moon." The request was odd but not alarming. Elliot searched the archives and found the song. As the track played, something strange happened. The studio lights flickered, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Shrugging it off as an electrical hiccup, Elliot continued his shift. But as the hours dragged on, more calls came in. Each caller sounded distant, almost otherworldly, and requested songs that weren't part of the usual rotation. Forgotten ballads from decades past, some Elliot didn't even recognize. One voice in particular stood out, a woman's faint, melodic whisper that lingered in his ears even after the call ended. "Play When I Fall in Love," she said, her tone laced with an unsettling sorrow. As the song played, Elliot noticed something peculiar in the glass window separating the booth from the rest of the station. A faint outline of a figure, just for a second, hovered in the reflection. He spun around, but the room was empty. Elliot laughed nervously. "Get a grip, man," he muttered to himself. But the night only grew stranger. The phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was familiar. It was his own voice. "Elliot," it said, distorted and echoing, "you're not alone tonight." He froze, his breath shallow. The static on the line grew louder, morphing into a deep, vibrating hum that seemed to come from inside the studio walls. Desperate for answers, Elliot began combing through the station's history during the next break. Old newspaper clippings pinned to a corkboard in the office told a grim story. Decades ago, a young singer named Clara Hayes had performed live at the station. She was a local talent with a promising future, but her life was cut short when her car skidded off the icy mountain road on her way home from the station. Her final performance had been broadcast live. The song she sang? "When I Fall in Love." Elliot's hands trembled as he read. He felt a chill behind him, and when he turned, the faint scent of lavender, the same perfume his grandmother used to wear, wafted through the air. He returned to the booth, determined to finish his shift and leave the station as soon as possible. But the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was clearer and unmistakably Clara's. "Thank you for playing my song," she said. "But you need to leave." "Who are you?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. The line went dead, and suddenly, the power in the station flickered. The hum from earlier returned, louder and more insistent. Equipment sparked, and the old records on the shelves began to rattle violently. The broadcast system malfunctioned, emitting a high-pitched scream that forced Elliot to cover his ears. The glass window of the booth shattered, and Elliot saw her, a translucent figure standing in the doorway. Clara's face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips moved silently, forming the words, "Leave now, or they'll find you." Elliot didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his coat and bolted from the station. As he ran to his car, he glanced back and saw the station lights flickering erratically. Shadows danced inside the building, shapes that didn't belong to any living person. When he reached the main road, his car stalled. Desperation set in as he tried the ignition over and over, but the engine refused to start. Snow fell heavier now, and the world seemed unnaturally silent, save for the faint hum that seemed to follow him. Suddenly, the radio in his car turned on by itself, tuning into WXMT. Clara's voice came through, clear and haunting. "They're here." Elliot looked up and saw figures emerging from the woods, their forms tall and distorted, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He locked his doors and crouched low, his breath fogging up the windows. The creatures surrounded his car, tapping on the glass with elongated fingers. The last thing Elliot saw before everything went black was Clara's reflection in the rearview mirror, her expression one of sorrow. Elliot was never heard from again. The station closed down a few weeks later, its equipment mysteriously damaged beyond repair. Local legends claim you can still hear WXMT broadcasting faintly on snowy nights, playing Clara's final song. And if you're unlucky enough to tune in, beware. The phantom frequency might just find you next. Third story. The Fugitive of Area 51. Marcus Reed had once been a respected engineer at Area 51, tasked with maintaining classified technology most people couldn't even imagine. For years he worked in silence, repairing devices and keeping secrets under lock and key. But what Marcus discovered one fateful night pushed him past the edge of loyalty to his employers. It began when he stumbled into Hangar 17, a section of the facility he had never been allowed to enter. A request to repair a malfunctioning ventilation system led him into a labyrinth of corridors he hadn't known existed. What he saw chilled him to the core. Inside the hangar were rows of containment units filled with alien beings, some alive, others mangled and dissected. One chamber contained a creature fused with human components, its soulless eyes fixed on him as it writhed in silent agony. But the horror didn't stop there. Marcus found files detailing the facility's experiments, genetic manipulation, mind control technologies, and plans to weaponize extraterrestrial entities. Even worse, some of the projects involved abducting civilians, erasing their memories, and implanting them with tracking devices. That night, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He began secretly copying documents, photos, and blueprints, determined to expose the atrocities to the world. But Area 51 had eyes everywhere. When Marcus didn't show up for work the next day, his absence didn't go unnoticed. By the time he returned home, he sensed he was being followed. His phone was tapped, his internet cut off, and ominous black SUVs began circling his neighborhood at night. Then came the assassins. It started with a near miss, a masked figure waiting in the shadows of his garage one evening. Marcus barely escaped with his life, a knife slicing through his jacket as he wrestled the attacker to the ground and fled. The next day, his car exploded just moments after he parked it outside a convenience store. Marcus realized he couldn't run forever. If he wanted to survive, he had to fight back. He vanished off the grid, abandoning his life and disappearing into the wilderness. For months, he lived in isolation, honing his body and mind. He trained in martial arts, learned how to handle firearms, and studied military survival tactics. He turned his remote cabin into a fortress, rigged with traps and cameras. But the assassins didn't give up. One cold night, Marcus woke to the sound of his perimeter alarms blaring. He checked his monitors and saw shadows moving through the trees, silent, methodical. The assassins had found him. The attack was swift. Explosions rocked the cabin as smoke grenades filled the air. But Marcus was ready. Armed with traps, a rifle, and his raw determination, he fought back. The assassins were skilled, but Marcus's knowledge of Area 51's tactics gave him an edge. One by one, he picked them off, his traps maiming some and his bullets taking down others. But as he stood over the last body, catching his breath, a chilling realization dawned on him. These weren't ordinary assassins. Beneath their black tactical gear, their bodies were wrong. Their skin was grayish and rubbery, and their limbs bent in ways no humans should. Marcus recognized the truth immediately. These were the hybrids he had seen in Hangar, the product of the experiments he had tried to expose. The fight wasn't over. The final assassin rose, its body twitching unnaturally. Its eyes glowed faintly as it lunged at Marcus, its strength inhuman. The battle was brutal, but Marcus managed to stab the creature through the chest with a broken pipe. It let out an ear-splitting scream before collapsing, its body convulsing violently before disintegrating into ash. Marcus knew he couldn't stay at the cabin any longer. He gathered what little he had left and fled into the night. For the next year, Marcus became a ghost. He traveled from town to town, leaving no trace of his existence. He continued his mission to expose Area 51, releasing small pieces of information to conspiracy theorists online. But every time he sent a file, strange things happened. His location would be compromised, or he would notice shadows following him where there should be none. One night, while staying at a cheap motel, Marcus received an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "We know what you've done." Attached was a video of his cabin exploding, with a voiceover stating, "There's nowhere you can hide." The lights in the room flickered, and a low hum began to fill the air, a sound he recognized all too well. It was the same hum he had heard in the containment chambers at Area 51, the same sound that had haunted his nightmares. Marcus grabbed his bag and ran, but as he stepped outside, the hum grew louder. He looked up and saw something hovering in the sky, a triangular craft, silent except for that oppressive noise. A beam of light shot down, illuminating him. The last thing Marcus remembered was being lifted off the ground, his body paralyzed as shadowy figures descended from the craft. Marcus was never seen again. A few weeks later, conspiracy forums buzzed with activity. Someone claiming to have inside knowledge of Area 51 uploaded a series of cryptic files before disappearing. The files contained grainy footage of alien experiments, blueprints for hybrid organisms, and detailed accounts of Marcus's encounters. But one video stood out. It showed Marcus, his eyes vacant and his movements robotic, working inside Hangar 17. A voice off-screen said, "He's one of us now," and then the video ended with the same hum, growing louder, until the screen went black. The fourth story, The Forgotten Experiment. In the heart of the Nevada desert, beyond the electric fences and armed guards of Area 51, there existed a facility even the most daring conspiracy theorists couldn't fathom, a forgotten sector buried deep underground, known only to a handful of elite personnel as Project Abyss. It was a place where experiments transcended the boundaries of morality and sanity. Eric Voss, a low-level technician who had worked at Area 51 for over a decade, had heard whispers of Project Abyss but dismissed them as rumors. That was until the night he was summoned for an urgent maintenance job in a part of the base he didn't even know existed. When Eric arrived at the access point, he found a single elevator guarded by two silent men in black suits. Without a word, they handed him a keycard and stepped aside. The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity, the air growing colder and heavier with each passing second. The doors opened to reveal a vast, dimly lit chamber. Glass pods lined the walls, each containing grotesque creatures that defied description, some vaguely humanoid, others a nightmarish fusion of flesh, metal, and alien biology. A low, pulsating hum filled the air, and the faint sound of muffled whispers seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Eric's task was simple: repair a malfunctioning coolant system. But as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadows seemed to move, and the whispers grew louder, forming fragmented sentences in a language he didn't recognize. One pod in particular drew his attention. It was larger than the others and filled with a thick, black liquid. Something massive stirred within, pressing against the glass from the inside. The outline of the creature was indistinct, but its sheer size and presence made Eric's skin crawl. A metal plate on the pod read, "Specimen X0, do not disturb." Suddenly, the hum of the chamber intensified, and the lights flickered. Alarms blared, and the pod containing specimen X0 began to shake violently. The black liquid drained away, revealing a monstrous entity unlike anything Eric had ever seen. Its body was a shifting mass of tendrils, eyes, and jagged alien limbs. Eric stumbled backward as the pod's glass cracked, then shattered. The creature let out a guttural roar that reverberated through the chamber, shaking the very walls. The other pods began to malfunction, their occupants waking and thrashing against their confines. Panic set in as Eric bolted for the elevator, but the whispers followed him, louder and clearer now. They weren't random, they were speaking to him, calling his name, taunting him. "Eric, you belong to us now." The elevator wasn't an option. The control panel was dead. He spotted a maintenance tunnel and dove into it, crawling through the claustrophobic space as the sounds of chaos erupted behind him. The creatures were loose, and their guttural cries echoed through the facility. Eric emerged in a control room filled with monitors displaying scenes of carnage. Security personnel were being torn apart, and the creatures were spreading, consuming everything in their path. But what froze Eric in his tracks was one monitor showing his own face, staring blankly back at him. It wasn't a live feed. It was a recording of him standing in the chamber of Project Abyss, speaking calmly into a recorder. "I have initiated the release of Specimen X0, the recorded Eric said. "This is humanity's reckoning." Eric's mind raced. He had no memory of recording that. No memory of doing anything but repairing the coolant system. Was this a trick? Some kind of hallucination? The lights in the control room flickered, and a chilling presence filled the air. Eric turned to see Specimen X0 standing in the doorway, its form now more humanoid but no less terrifying. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its voice echoed in his mind. "You were always part of us, Eric. You just needed to remember." Before he could react, the creature reached out, its tendrils wrapping around him. His vision blurred, and his body felt weightless. Memories flooded his mind, memories that weren't his own. He saw himself overseeing the experiments, giving orders, and unlocking the pod that housed Specimen X0. Eric screamed as his body and mind were consumed, merging with the entity. The monitors in the control room went dark, one by one, leaving only the sound of static and a single message flashing on the largest screen. Containment breached. Assimilation in progress. The next morning, a maintenance team found the elevator doors wide open but no sign of Eric or any other personnel. All records of Project Abyss had been erased, leaving no trace of its existence. But miles away, in a small Nevada town, residents began reporting strange phenomena, shadowy figures in the corners of their vision, whispers in the night, and a man with glowing eyes wandering the streets, watching, waiting. The abyss had escaped, and it was just beginning.